Hi everyone, hope you're all well. Um, just a quick word on this storm that was supposed to hit Storm Eunice. I have to say, here in Sunderland, we've had a bit of wind, but I suspect there's been a bit of hyperbole around this. I know that four people have sadly died, but it was being called the worst storm to hit scheduled to be the worst storm to hit in decades. I think there's been a bit of hyperbole around that. We've had a bit of wind here, but nothing exceptional. Um, Okay, so the Beijing Winter Olympics are almost coming to an end. Tomorrow will mark the closing ceremony. It hasn't been a great run for Team GB. I don't think we've got any medals this time round, which is unfortunate. We never do as well in the Winter Olympics, but we remain an Olympic superpower. I mean, it's not going to make much difference to the overall medal table, of which Team GB ranks third currently. So, we are an Olympic superpower, but this hasn't been our best games. I noticed earlier on that the British team beat the Chinese team in curling. I know nothing about curling. I don't know anything about the rules. Apparently, they didn't get a medal for that. But anyway, um, yeah. So there's a lot of things to say about this particular Olympics. There's Kamila Valieva controversy, the 15-year-old Russian who was thought to have used drugs. I don't know the full story of that. That's not what I want to talk about. I think Russia and drugs is nothing new. Um, One of the things that stood out with this Olympics is a young woman by the name of Eileen Gu, and she has kind of become a major talking point of these games. Before I get into that, the games themselves, the controversy, whenever there's a controversy around an Olympics, it's usually beforehand, and then it kind of dies down as the Olympics get underway, and that's sort of been the case here, except that the controversy about hosting it is still very much there. Of course, Western countries have boycotted the games diplomatically. Boris Johnson said he wasn't in the boycotts, but there was no plans for officials to go, which I think was a diplomatic way to say it was sort of a boycott. There's usually some sort of political or royal representation at these things, and this time round there's been none. Um, I think the fact that there's a pandemic was always going to be a factor. That's what affected the Summer Games last year in Tokyo. I also think there's an aspect of less hype in China itself because it's the second time that Beijing's hosted, therefore it is less important than the Beijing 2008 Summer Games. China pulled that off. It was a massive event. It was arguably the most watched event in human history. Up to 4 billion people watched that. This was a much, much smaller scale affair. And not just because it's a Winter Games. I think just generally, this will probably be one of the most forgettable Olympics ever. I don't think the viewing figures are even that high. Um, I just don't think there's anything exceptional about these games apart from the controversies that I've mentioned that will stand out. I'm sure records have been broken, they always are at Olympic Games. Um, Now, I've always said that I think athletes and politics, athletes shouldn't be attacked for a wider political situation. That's always been my position. I've always said that I don't think Beijing should have been allowed to host these games because of China's aggressive behavior around the world, their Pacific expansionism, their tearing up of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, their failure to be transparent about COVID, which has affected all of us, and most egregiously the cultural genocide in Xinjiang and the mass incarceration of Uyghur people for no other reason than their faith and their ethnicity. I do not think that China should be normalized in the eyes of the world. And this idea that the Olympics aren't political, I think it's naive. They've always been political. Always. I mean, look at the 1936 Olympics, which was held in Berlin, of course. It was an opportunity for the Third Reich to kind of showcase themselves. Whenever the Olympics have been held in a totalitarian state, the totalitarian state in question have used them as a showcase to promote themselves. I understand there was a Uyghur torture error that Beijing, of course, utilized. Um, One good thing about this is there hasn't been the same level of nationalism this time round. What I mean by that is there's been no torch relay, at least not on the same scale. So at least we haven't had the scenes of hysterical Chinese nationalists, attacking anyone who stands up to them. I remember in 2008, I've quoted this a few times because I think it's an important anecdote. Um, when that torch was going through cities around the world, Seoul, Paris, London, Toronto, Washington, um, there were some very ugly scenes um, where you had pro-Tibet protesters, human rights activists confronting the torch bearers. Um, but there was guys in blue uniforms, they were supposedly torch minders, who actually superseded our local police, pushed them out of the way. I think that was not a case study of, or rather a platform of the peace and harmony that China was promoting, but rather its aggressive, hawkish nationalism, because it was pretty much look how powerful we are, and it was a big show off for China. Now you could argue all Olympics are. I mean, when we had London 2012, of course it was a showcase for Britain and British culture, and we had that fantastic opening ceremony directed by Danny Boyle. Um, so that's to be expected. There's nothing unusual or controversial about that in of itself, except that China really isn't a normal country. It's a rising superpower. That's why there is another layer to this. Um, so at least there hasn't been that. At least there hasn't been that ugly display of nationalism. My Chinese friends haven't even spoken about it that much. I've seen a little bit on Chinese social media, but really, compared to 2008, it's been relatively low key. But this is Xi Jinping's games. Remember, the last time round it was Hu Jintao was leading China. So this is a personal thing for Xi Jinping. Um, in some ways, it's been a failure in terms of being a big PR campaign for the Chinese. Apparently, the reports from the site itself have been pretty bad. Athletes have been complaining about the gulag-like conditions and appalling meals that they've been getting and severe COVID restrictions. Now, I suppose you could say, given that COVID started in China, it's understandable that they would want to have heavy restrictions. But that poses the question, why did the games go ahead in the first place? Um, then of course there's the Novak Djokovic controversy. Um, but that's outside the Olympics. What I want to talk about though, particularly, is this young woman Eileen Gu, because she's become a little bit of a political football, and I don't think that she is entirely blameless in this, because of the decisions that she's made. So I'm going to read out an article from the Telegraph, or at least some of it. Um, she's become one of the faces of these games. Basically, she's an American-born citizen. Um, this is from the Telegraph. Eileen Gu, Chinese censorship cannot mask the uncomfortable reception to America-born snow princess. She is known as the Snow Princess. This is by Pippa Field in China, but it appears that the crown may be slipping for freestyle skier Eileen Gu. China's 18-year-old sporting sensation, born in America but opting to compete for her mother's native country, became the first freestyle skier to win three medals at single games on Friday, with gold in the halfpipe final. Canadian duo Casey Sharp and Rachel Carker completed the podium, with Britain's Zoe Atkin in ninth. As for Gu, victory made her the joint most successful athlete in sports history, first freestyle skier to win three medals at one Olympic Games, undoubtedly music to the ears of her 20 plus brands and sponsors invested in her success in Beijing, and her 2 million followers on the Chinese social media platform Weibo. As for her part, she has well and truly lived up to her role as China's poster girl of these games, again speaking post victory of being able to spread this message and inspire young girls from my own passion for the sport. Now, that would be fine. A successful young Olympian inspiring other young women to do well in sports. That is an inspiring message. The problem is, whether she likes it or not, is being used as a political tool for the CCP. I mean, she could say what she wants about that, but that's the reality. And the report continues, except not everyone is buying into the Gu show. Certain critics stateside were quick to label her a traitor in the aftermath of her opening Big Air win earlier in the Games after defecting to represent China. So I don't know if she defected within the Games, I'm not sure about that, or if she was representing China from the start. Perhaps more concerning for the teen sensation, who tries to politically straddle both camps with her comments of feeling attached to each, ripples of dissent over her privilege and relatability are now sweeping through in the Olympic host nation. One web article, which prompted swift censoring action from the government after going viral, asked, "What does Eileen Gu's success have to do with ordinary people?" So this is interesting. This whole propaganda campaign by Beijing to use her might not be working. She speaks Mandarin fluently, incidentally, and obviously English. Um, but there's another article, again from the Daily Telegraph, and it reads, well, it's quite a long article and try to put links here. Chinese skiing medalist, gold medalist Eileen Gu hits back at traitors, excuse me, hits back at critics after being labelled a traitor. This is again by Pippa Field. I'll just get into that's talking about the background to why she's being called a traitor. Basically, the argument is why would she choose to represent a communist country? Yes, she is of Chinese lineage, but she was born in the United States, I believe, San Francisco. Um, and obviously there's no secret that there's very tense relations between West and East right now. Um, this is an interesting article by Oliver Brown. China, it was an exquisitely choreographed Olympic moment. A brilliant 18-year-old freestyle skier winning a gold medal to sit alongside her multiple modeling contracts, all while Thomas Bach and a few hundred pre-selected fans clapped ecstatically in the background. The one complication is that Eileen Gu is not the poster girl of these Winter Games, but a pawn in a complex diplomatic game. No sooner did she toast the greatest moment of her young life than the word traitor began trending alongside her name. It does not take long listening to Gu to realize that she was born and raised a long way from Beijing. While fluent in Mandarin, she delivers her interviews in English in impeccable Californian upspeak. For it was just 4 years ago that, as a high school student in San Francisco, she chose to switch national affiliations. Okay, so it was 4 years ago, and compete for China at the Winter Olympics. Her objective, she explained, was to wield greater influence as a role model than she could hope to maintain in the United States. Whether she's thinking of the bigger population or the bigger market, I don't know. That rationale is hardly unfounded. Long before she sees gold thanks to an astounding final jump in the Olympics' inaugural big air competition, she was China's chosen face of its sporting future, placed front and centre in every advert as the Snow Princess. And I've seen that on Weibo. But where her shift in allegiance stirred raptures here in Beijing, it has made her persona non grata among sections of her American audience. "Welcome to China," said Fox News' Will Kane on learning of her last latest triumph. "I hope stardom and the riches that you have earned through betraying America are all worth it because you have definitely sold out." The problem for Gu, who is shortly to enroll at Stanford University, is that she would like to have it both ways. Her oft repeated mantra that in the US I'm American and when I'm in China I'm Chinese. It's a cute line, but sadly impractical, for the simple reason that China does not recognize dual citizenship. Clear implication is that by declaring for China, she has renounced her US passport, a subject on which she repeatedly refuses to elaborate. I mean, that's true. That's legally in China, they only recognize one nationality, which is what complicates things for mixed couples. As such, when she represents her decision solely in terms of idealism, others only see opportunism. Christy Liskinen, who was a preeminent advocate for freestyle skiing to be included at the Olympics, casts doubts on Gu's motives. She highlights how, while the US system has made Gu the athlete she is today, it's China that has transformed her into a commercial phenomenon with endorsements from Louis Vuitton and Victoria's Secret, plus invitations to the Met Gala and Paris Fashion Week. Bear in mind, she's 18 years old. She's got the world at her feet. Under normal circumstances, you could only congratulate on her monetizing her prodigious talent, except the conditions under which Beijing 2022 is being staged are anything but normal. Relations between the US and China are at their frothiest in decades, with President Biden ordering a diplomatic boycott of the Games after his intelligence agencies described Chinese treatment of the Uyghur population in Xinjiang province as a genocide. For Gu to imagine that in this climate she can be a supranational butterfly, balancing vastly different cultural expectations and attitudes to free speech is at best naive, at worst downright cynical. And I'm inclined to agree with that. She herself said, I'll just get a quote from her, just to be fair. Um, yeah, I've always expressed my gratitude to the US team as well. They have been nothing but supportive to me. Same to the Chinese team. Sport is a way we can unite people. It doesn't have to be related to nationality. It does not need to be used to divide people. Um, and I'm just continuing regarding the controversy. Bear with me. Um, Yeah, I'm not going to waste my time trying to placate people who are uneducated, who are one uneducated. Well, that's a bit arrogant for her to just dismiss all her critics as uneducated. And two, they're not going to experience the gratitude and love I have, the great fortune to experience on a daily basis. If they don't believe me, and if people don't like me, that is their loss. They're never going to win the Olympics. Well, that's a pretty arrogant rebuke, actually. Okay, so this is my take. I'm cynical. I don't want to be, but I am. Now, some people, some of her supporters might say that her critics are jealous because this is a young woman who's being very successful. But I don't think you can have it both ways. I think if you've enjoyed all the privileges of growing up in a free country, i.e., freedom of speech, the opportunities that the United States affords, and then you choose, for whatever reason, whether it be for her heritage, the fact her mother was Chinese, or whether she feels a draw that way, or whether it's for marketing reasons, whatever the reason, to say it's simply about bridging two sides. Now, that would be very nice. But by choosing to wear the Chinese flag, she is endorsing the CCP. She can deny it. She can say that she's not political, but she is allowing herself to be a pawn. So, whilst the word traitor is a loaded term, and people have pointed out, those who have defended her have said athletes do this all the time. They're born in one country, they represent another, and there's many examples of that. But I do think this is an exceptional case because of the time that we're in and because of the two countries involved. Say, for example, you had someone who's born in France but represented Belgium, that would be far less controversial. Um, with the United States and China, the two most powerful countries in the world, we, we may as well say it. There's no point glossing it over. We're effectively in a Cold War right now. Um, so for her to just naively think that she's being neutral, that she can somehow bridge both sides, sooner or later she's going to have to accept that on the Chinese side, she's going to serve as an apologist for the CCP. Why? Because they're going to use her and they're going to keep using her. Now, I feel that by choosing to wear the Chinese flag at this time, she is endorsing the CCP. And by extension, she is endorsing everything the CCP is doing. Chinese athletes, but that is people born in China, have less of a choice. If they're ambitious in sports, I don't blame them for wanting to represent the country. I do think it's different though, because it's far, far harder for them to defect, because their families could be threatened. They would take very serious risks for doing that, and they'd need to probably get asylum status in the United States. For her, enjoying the privileges of living in the United States to defect to China is ostensibly just for marketing purposes. She says she knows where her heart is. Well, where does her heart lie with the genocide of the Uyghur people? Cultural genocide, at least. What's her views on the CCP? She can't say I'm not political because she's being used as a political pawn. And she's young, so maybe she's naive, but her arrogant response that people are uneducated, she's the uneducated one if she's going to turn a blind eye to what China's doing. So, quite honestly, I've no sympathy for any heat that goes in her direction. She is young, and obviously, that criticism should be reasonable. It shouldn't extend to vitriol. But if she's going to hit back, she has to expect heat. She can't have it both ways. I mean, put it this way: let's say you did have a Chinese national who then went to the United States, they would be called a traitor, no question about it. I think she has this idealistic idea that she can bridge both sides. Actually, I don't think that she really does. Without knowing her personally, I think she's just being greedy. I think she's just doing what she said. She wants to get more marketing opportunities. I don't think she's really doing this for ideological reasons, like she wants to bridge both sides. That's a convenient narrative, and it's one that, taps straight into Chinese propaganda. I was looking at Global Times Facebook page the other day, and of course it was full of how the games are all about harmony and all about uniting humanity. Well, that's a cruel insult to the victims of Chinese communism, to the Uyghurs. I just don't think that totalitarian regimes should be normalized via sporting events. And the IOC's attitude that, they're not political, that this was predetermined, etc. I just think these games will go down as the games that placated the cultural genocide of the Uyghur people. And they're rightly called the genocide games. For that reason, although they're forgettable, I think, in many ways, they're also notorious in many ways. I say forgettable because I don't think they've had the same sort of viewership as other games. Also, the fact they've come pretty soon after the Tokyo Games, I think people might have a little bit of Olympic fatigue. Um, the athletes probably won't remember it well because of the conditions that they lived in. Um, so all in all, I'm not sure if these games can be written as a huge success. Probably not a failure either because nothing, there's been no terrorist attack, there's been no major problems actually in the games themselves. But in terms of being a big PR thing for the CCP, I'm not sure that it's been that successful. I mean, it has been diplomatically boycotted. Um, as an event, it's small in scale compared to other Olympics. Um, yeah. Anyway, my own take is ultimately Eileen Gu might fundamentally have the right to compete for China, but she can't have it both ways, and she cannot just demand that people accept that she is choosing to wave the flag of a country whose government is presiding over some of the world's worst human rights abuses. Cannot just pretend to be neutral on this. She cannot say that she is all about trying to bridge the two sides. It's America that has given her freedoms. Honestly, if people say to her, well, you've made your bed, go and lie in it, go back to China, some would say, oh, that's racist. I don't think it is. And I'm sick and tired of the woke left throwing that term around. This is a different situation. Racism would be hurling racial abuse at her because of her ethnicity, challenging her for the fact that she is allowing herself to be used as a pawn by the communist regime of the People's Republic of China. It's not racist, it's valid criticism. Calling out her, double standards, the double standards of enjoying the privileges and freedoms of the United States, whilst basically stabbing her country in the back. That's not, in my opinion, um, unfair criticism. So that's my take on Eileen Gu. If this was any other situation, if this was any other two countries, except maybe Russia and the United States, I don't think there'd be a controversy. Let me just throw this out. Say she was representing Indonesia, not in the Winter Olympics, but let's say Indonesia or Vietnam or almost any other country. It wouldn't be controversial. But China is not a normal country. It's not. It's a rising superpower. And the Chinese take Olympic medals like weapons. They really weaponize it. They're obsessed by medal counts. And most countries feel some pride at medal counts. I do. I'm proud of the fact that Britain's an Olympic superpower. But I don't think it's, you know, a militaristic thing. I don't think there should be that much of an obsession with it. The Chinese do. They're obsessed by medal counts. And, they also like to complain in Olympic Games. In Tokyo, you had Chinese netizens going out of their way to complain about unfair officialdom, that Chinese athletes weren't being scored correctly and so on, even though they do well anyway. And even though I remember there was a British boxer, in the women's boxing, and her Chinese opponent was clearly fouling. Nothing happened to the Chinese opponent, but did the British get up in arms about it? No. We just accepted that sometimes these things happen. So personally, I don't think that you can pretend that when it comes to China and the Olympics, there's no politics. There always is because of the nature of the Chinese regime. And they say it's not political. They know damn well they're playing politics with this. So sorry, Eileen Gu, you can't have it both ways. You've chosen to represent a communist state. That's your right, but it's your choice. So take ownership of it and, accept that there's going to be criticism.